This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so basically, this is about some new research that uses functional magnetic resonance imaging scans before and after neuroscience-informed counseling and interventions. And these scans show changes in the structure and function of different brain areas, such as the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala.
With the structure of the brain, different areas of your brain control different aspects of you. So your brain stem at the very bottom, it controls your breathing and heart rate. Your limbic region, it supports your emotions and your emotional regulation. The cerebellum, it is what controls your movements and muscle memory and your bike riding. It's also known as your little brain. The amygdala and the sympathetic nervous system are what you have for your fight, flight, or freeze reactions, and that is what keeps us safe from threats. And it really helps to protect us at all costs. The parasympathetic nervous system, that's what assists you with resting and digestion. And then the cortex, both the frontal and the prefrontal cortex, is the rational portion of the brain where conscious thought, planning, and organizing information comes from. And then shifting between tasks with your executive functioning and thinking about thinking, or your metacognition. And then the thalamus, it coordinates all of the brain regions. Your executive functioning is your working memory. It's what helps you plan and organize. It's what motivates you and helps with task initiation and completion. It is the ability to multitask, and it also is your emotional regulation and being able to process your feelings. It also helps with stress tolerance.
Sorry, it gets a little frozen or something. Okay.
That's okay.
All right, so now we're going to focus on the neural and social development of children. So we're going to start with ages 0 to 11. So there are complex interactions between genes, epigenetic processes, and environmental experience that confer neural growth into adulthood. The fetal, newborn, and infant development is critical and has lifelong and profound effects. Infant development is impacted by oxytocin in the brain. This is critical in bonding and attachment. Oxytocin is critical in calming and soothing. So the infant learns early on about calming and soothing, which later is used in reducing anxiety, fear, and depression using coping skills. By approximately 2 years of age, all major brain structures resemble those of adult brains. The sensory and motor function development is there, and there's slow development of the prefrontal cortex and executive functioning. So those start around that time. So when a 2-year-old demonstrates difficulties with frustration tolerance and impulse control, that is basically where their brain development is at. So much different from adults. Play behavior has a critical role in early childhood brain development. Unstructured And self-directed play facilitates creativity and mental processing. And play with other children facilitates social skills and communication. So unfortunately, a lot of our children at all ages have suffered during the pandemic to not have play with other children as often when schools were shut down. Okay, so from ages 12 to 18, there's a lot of brain development happening. So adolescent neurogenesis occurs at 4 to 5 times the rate of adult neurogenesis. So their brain development is rapid fire during these ages. Dopamine production increases 2 to 7-fold during this stage of neural development. The frontal region of the brain continues to develop. The prefrontal brain structures continue to develop until the mid-20s. Adolescents experience greater development of brain structures associated with emotional experiencing, motivation and reward seeking, increased social awareness, increased self-awareness, increased ability to think about thinking, metacognition, not brain structures associated with processing and controlling them. And this explains why adolescents engage in more high risk-taking behaviors without considering consequences relative to most adults who have more developed brains and those structures and areas of the brain associated with the prefrontal cortex and more complex thinking. And this time, ages 12 to 18, is also when the onset of many mental health disorders begin. And that is critical to note. All right, so also very, very important during this age and with brain development is sleep. So sleep during adolescence promotes neurophysiological development. So it's key to all of the development that's happening. Adolescents experience a sleep-wake phase delay that results in a circadian rhythm of later bedtimes and wake times. So it is typical and normal based on their brains at this time that adolescents are going to fall asleep later. Naturally, that's their circadian rhythm at this time, and then that they would want to sleep later and need to for the amount of sleep that they need for all of this brain and physiological development that's happening at this time. 90% of adolescents, however, are sleep deprived. That is such a large number, and I feel like I see that with the students and children and adolescents I work with in schools. I have feelings cards, and the tired card is pretty much selected maybe more than others. It's very common, and adolescents seem very exhausted. And sleep deprivation can induce anxiety and depression, same in adults. And sleep deprivation it negatively impacts learning and academic performance. It specifically impairs long-term memory storage and retrieval. And it specifically impairs working memory and attention. And sleep deprivation impairs metabolism. So it's linked to weight gain. Adolescents need 8.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep per night for optimal neural and social and physiological development. Sleep hygiene is important for school counselors or any counselors and mental health professionals to understand and teach to families and adolescents. And sleep hygiene includes having a predictable bedtime routine, no sugar or caffeine before bed, stopping devices 1 hour before bedtime, which probably is not a recommendation that will go over well with many adolescents at this time. Also, no alcohol or drugs before bedtime. And physical exercise is also critical in the neuro and social development of adolescents at this stage. Physical exercise is directly correlated with improvements in working memory in adolescents, and physical exercise stimulates brain chemicals associated with antidepressant properties.
So as children are developing into adolescence, only 80% of their brain is ready for use. So the brain is made up of gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is the structure of the brain, and the white matter is what connects gray matter to each other and allows each section of the brain to communicate. So while teen brains have an abundance of neuroplasticity, which is the ability to change thinking patterns, become smarter, and increase that brain power, they are not everything is connected yet. So a good visual for this is that there is a city with a bunch of buildings, but all the buildings are on the water. And the buildings represent the gray matter, but there are no bridges and there are no roads, and there's no way that someone can swim from one building to the next. So while all the buildings are there and each building has people in them, people cannot go from one building to another. There's no way that they can go from one place to another. And that's kind of how it is in a teen brain, that not everything is connected, but all the pieces are there and they're developing, which also is why teens and adolescents might make more decisions that are impulsive without thinking about consequences. As these connections start to form, this is when teens can learn their strengths, build more resilience, live fully, and understand a fuller picture of their surroundings and themselves. Oh, the brain has been shown to be highly malleable, and it can build and be rebuilt by our experiences and relationships. So as teens are growing, their brain is being formed based on what they are seeing. New neural pathways can occur with practice through a safe and therapeutic relationship, through empathy, emotional arousal also helps with consolidation and integration of neural pathways. And this affect and cognition occurs with expressive and mindful practices. So you can actually change the brain. When you are explaining the brain to children, adolescents, and parents, you want to be very straightforward and matter of fact. This needs to be a very intentional conversation with what is happening in order to find out why. Remember that the brain is a very complex structure that develops front to back. And what that means is the fight or flight responses develop first, whereas the prefrontal cortex continues to develop until about age 25. So therefore, children and adolescents can't always make the same decisions that adults can because their brain is not fully formed yet. Children and teens may have difficulty regulating impulses, and as they develop into adolescence, they begin to seek independence, learn empathy, and become more self-aware. So having these conversations is very important so they can understand a bit more about what's happening. With neuroscience-informed approaches in counseling, things that are helpful can be stress management and stress-related disorders, emotional regulation, expanding motivation, academic achievement, ADHD, substance use, learning disabilities, self-harm, and it can also have a trauma fostering intrinsic resilience to treat ACEs. Neuroscience-informed approaches also help with behavior modification. You can use neuroscience-informed cognitive behavior therapy, as well as social emotional learning. You can practice mindful-based interventions, creative arts and play therapy, and the neurofeedback, a form of biofeedback, and that changes the brainwave patterns but requires special training and equipment.
Okay, thank you all for your attention and receiving all of this information. Basically, I put in the chat, but you can email us and we can send you the PowerPoint. And two of the resources that we used most and I recommend include this, okay, it's not showing on the webcam, but the Neuroscience-Informed Counseling with Children and Adolescents by Field and Ghostin, and that's published by the American Counseling Association. And we also really liked Your Amazing Teen Brain by Nebelstein, and that has CBT and neuroscience skills to stress less, balance emotions, and strengthen your growing mind. They're specifically referenced in our reference section, along with all of our references. But I just wanted to point those two things out if you want to delve into this more. Now we're going to move into some of the specific, we wanted to give you the research on the brain and the brain development. And now we're going to move into the interventions and theories and techniques that are neuroscience informed. I feel like what I learned when I started exploring this topic was I use many of these strategies already. I didn't realize that they were neuroscience informed approaches. So now I have the research and science and neuroscience behind it. And I find it really helpful when I'm talking to children and adolescents and parents, when I'm trying to explain behavior and put the presenting problems in the context of brain development. So I feel like it gives even young children, empowers them to feel more in control if they know how the brain works and how they can use their own strategies and techniques to change their brain, basically. It is powerful to hear. Okay, so with behavior modification, I'm sure that that's something, behaviorism, that we've all were trained in and use in our practices, specifically positive reinforcement. When a child receives a desired consequence immediately following the desired behavior. This can be positive verbal reinforcement. It can be a hug, physical touch that parents would give to their children when the child does the desired behavior, stars on a star chart, things like that. And it's important to find the right rewards for each child or adolescent. So it's important to explore what they desire, what's something they would work toward, which really depends on each child and adolescent. So is it going to be they want game time or a special lunch with mom or dad, or maybe extra playtime after school or at school? Many children may want time on devices I have some children that love Legos, so they might earn Lego pieces. So these are techniques and strategies I would share with parents if they're struggling with behaviors at home. Also starting with smaller expectations in the beginning of this reward system, and then for shorter amounts of time for success, and then expanding and lengthening the time as the child progresses. And token economy systems with stickers or tokens that can be traded in for larger reinforcers. So this is where brain scans have shown significant neuroplasticity and improvements that can be seen in the brain structures after brain scans. Oh, okay. Here's an example of a behavior chart I might share with parents if I'm working with the family and they're saying this is the targeted behavior. There's a lot of emotional dysregulation. So as a counselor, I'm working with them on emotion regulation and calming skills. And then if this happens, the parents give them a star on the chart. Also struggling with getting homework done at home and starting and finishing that. So this is a simple chart that works really well at home and helps children use the skills they're learning in therapy with you at home. Also, there's a specific neuroscience-informed cognitive behavior therapy, so for short, in CBT. And this specifically looks at mindfulness and how that helps students or children and adolescents become aware of and relax in their body and their breath. An example of this NCBT approach that can be found is the Mindfulness Schools program. I work in a school that has this program, so all of the students are learning and practicing deep breathing and mindfulness as part of the school curriculum. Deep breathing is part of NCBT, so very, very similar to CBT theory and technique that you're already using, but specifically this field, Beeson and Jones developed this neuroscience-informed grounding methods. I will go over an example of that later. For example, a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method that uses all 5 senses to ground clients and help them replace behaviors with a more relaxed body and calm approach. Also, positive self-talk is part of the neuroscience-informed CBT. So techniques and skills you're probably already using with many of the children and adolescents you work with, but specifically they all are part of NCBT.
So one example is an example of diaphragm breathing. So when you are teaching children how to breathe, it is important for them to breathe in through their nose and breathe out through their mouth. So a few examples of that is to smell the flower and then blow the pinwheel. Another example might be blowing out a candle, smelling the candle and then blowing it out. One that I really like to use is a visual one. So you pretend like you have a hot cookie in your hand and it's too hot for you to eat, but it smells really good. So you want to smell the cookie and then blow on it to cool it down so you can eat it. Another example is firework breathing, where you take one of these tools that are on the slideshow, and when you have it where it's small, you breathe in, and then when it expands all the way, you breathe out. And these exercises help teach them how to slow down their breathing and regulate it a little bit. Another example is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. And this essentially takes you through all 5 of your senses to bring you back to present if you are emotionally dysregulated. It is a calming technique, and it can help you get through any kind of tough or stressful situation. So what you will do in this technique is to take a big breath, and then you as a counselor will say, 5. Look around and find 5 things that you can see and say them out loud. For example, computer, cup, or picture frame. When I'm working with children on this, I will typically say, look around the room and find 5 things that are square or yellow or circle, and give them something to aim for. I'll say, look around and find me 5 items that are square, and then say them out loud. So it gets the kids to look around and point out those objects. 4, I'll say, pay attention to your body and think about 4 things that you can feel, and say them out loud. So you could say, I feel my feet in my socks, I feel the hair on the back of my neck, or I feel the pillow that I'm sitting on. Sometimes children will also touch the table and say, I can feel the table, or they'll touch the chair that they're on and say that they can touch the chair. If they have a pencil or a pen in hand, they might use that as well. And fidget toys are great for that also. For 3, you'll say, listen for 3 sounds, and then name out loud what those sounds are. It could be traffic, typing on the computer, tummy rumbling, anything like that. It's helpful to have some kind of meditation music or some kind of background noise in your office so that there is a noise that they can focus on. But that is what you'll do for 3. And then for 2 will be 2 things that you can smell. So you'll say, name 2 things that you can smell and say them out loud. And if they can't smell anything, it's okay if they move to somewhere and sniff something. If there's nothing that they can smell at all, then have them name their 2 favorite smells and think about something that brings them joy. And then for one, say taste. Say 1 thing that you can taste. It could be anything like toothpaste or anything that's in their mouth. If they haven't eaten or drank anything in a while, then you can say, what's your favorite flavor? And this is really helpful. And then take another big, deep breath to end the exercise. Positive self-talk is also a way to help them change their thought process and to regulate their emotions more. Saying things like, I'm proud of myself, all of my problems have solutions, I forgive myself. There are many examples on the page, but showing them that it's okay to have positive self-talk is extremely useful in this practice. Dr. Gray, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, that took a while. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so let me get this going again. My apologies. I couldn't figure out how to unmute. I couldn't see it all of a sudden. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit specifically about social emotional learning and mindfulness-based interventions. In particular, a study that was recently published in 2021 by Limburger Truelove et al. Looked at these evidence-based practices that are neuroscience informed with, I believe it was middle school students. And these are the significant intervention effects that were reported. These children and adolescents who experienced this SEL and MBI curriculum that was neuroscience informed showed improvements in their academic achievement, improvements in increased stress tolerance, which of course all of the children and adolescents we work with could benefit from improving on. Also, the adults I work with. And increases in executive functioning. Specifically, they were able to measure increases in shifting in the brain, planning and organizing in the brain, and focus in the brain. So also critical skills for all of our children and adolescents to show increases in. Creative arts is a neuroscience-informed approach that is an excellent approach to allow children and adolescents to express themselves in empowering and creative ways. And these are all neuroscience-informed approaches that improve neuroplasticity in children and adolescents. So incorporating any music and sound into your counseling interventions, any body movement, dance, or yoga into your practice, clay, sand, painting, or drawing. I have an easel, lots of art materials, of course, a sand tray that looks much like the one in the picture. And I have clay, except the new clay that I found that I really love and children and adolescents love is this air dry clay. And sometimes they just use it as a fidget, but they can also be very creative with it. And I really do personally like the touch sensation that I experience with this air dry clay. It's pretty cheap and they have it on Amazon, of course. So creative arts facilitate expression. And in particular, the creation of symbols and metaphors become a psychological mechanism for change. And that includes changes in the brain. And that's Perryman, Blizzard, and Moss, 2019. Also, creative arts is very effective in working with trauma. Children who've experienced various types of trauma, and also children with a lot of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. Creative arts provide a non-threatening way to access and express trauma, which is associated with neuroplasticity. And it provides corrective experiences in the brain. So these are important neuroscience-informed approaches you can incorporate into your practice. I'm a registered play therapist. I love play therapy. I've been learning more and more every year in my practice and developing sand tray and play therapy skills, and also buying more and more toys. Recently, I had a young girl tell me she loved Creepy and that I did not have enough Creepy in my office. So after that, I purchased a lot of Creepy sand tray figurines. And when she came back, she was pretty impressed and incorporated many of them into her expressions and creations. So play therapy is developmentally appropriate for ages 3 through 12 and some older children. We know that when children experience trauma at a young age in therapy, they may regress back to the age when the trauma occurred. I have worked with teenagers. I can recall specifically a 16-year-old male who went to the dollhouse and said, "If I was a little boy, this is what I would do. And then he spent the rest of the session doing play therapy with the family in the house. So he chose to do that, and of course was much older than 12, but had experienced trauma at a young age. In play therapy, some of the basics that can be incorporated into your work as a child and adolescent therapist includes tracking statements. This is one of the really powerful pieces of play therapy that anyone can use. And honestly, sometimes I find that I might even use tracking statements with adults I work with. Tracking statements acknowledge the child's decision-making and creative capacities and are opportunities for children to see themselves in a different, more positive way. So examples of tracking statements include tracking what they're doing. Oh, you've decided to use the cash register today. You're showing me you like to play with money, or you're choosing to do art now. So just basically, I'm describing or tracking what the child is doing in the session. And then on another key part of play therapy you can incorporate into your work with children and adolescents includes reflecting the feelings and behaviors of the child. So a lot of times in play therapy, they look happy. They are proud of what they've figured out. They look happy when they take care of the doll or fix the teddy bear that is at the doctor. Or you might see signs of frustration. They might look annoyed when they can't get the Lego pieces to fit together. So reflecting the feelings that you see in the child's faces and reflecting behaviors of what the child is doing. So that allows the child to be creative, express themselves in a safe way and in a safe therapeutic relationship. And all of that is building positive brain connections and rewiring the brain in positive ways for children using play, which is their natural developmental expression mode and a very developmentally appropriate way for them to express themselves. So also in play therapy, there's a focus on the child's competency. Instead of in life, there might be a focus on their inadequacy, but in the play therapy, it's all about them and what they're doing well and their strengths and their competencies. As I mentioned, it's creating a safe, trusting relationship, which we know is essential in all of our work. And if you can provide kinetic sand and art materials, that allows the child to create and express themselves, and or just regular sand. And for young children, stuffed animals and all types of play therapy toys that can be aggressive and offer opportunities for nurturing as well. Scary things and comforting things. And reflecting the child's feelings and actions in a positive way. So when you see that they've calmed down, I notice when children are creating something artistic with me, they're painting or they're making something with clay, I notice that their body seems really calm and relaxed, and their breathing seems deeper. They're very focused. So I always like to point that out so that they notice and they're aware of feeling calm and relaxed, and know that art is something they can do if they need to calm down or relax. Okay, so some of the simple takeaways that you could start in your practice tomorrow include any social emotional learning strategies, emotional regulation techniques, mindfulness, problem solving, maps or wheels, any fidgets, tactile, slime, the air dry clay, any sand you can have in your office, even if it's something small. It doesn't have to be an elaborate tray, but maybe just a small plastic tub that has sand in it. I find that teens often like to just run their hands through sand while they're talking with me, especially when they have anxiety. Also, any art supplies you can incorporate into your office, deep breathing and mindfulness techniques, any opportunities to suggest peace corners or safe places at home or in a classroom that the child or adolescent knows is a safe, calm place for them. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding techniques that can use all 5 senses. Also, I use this with adults. Any behavior charts and positive reinforcement of behaviors, any play therapy strategies you can incorporate. All of these are evidence-based, neuroscience-informed approaches that you can use with children and adolescents in your practice. And now we're going to move into more an interactive time. Today we have about 15 minutes left, so we will have a little bit more time to discuss 3 possibilities. And I'm going to turn this over to Rachel to describe this process to you.
So what we'll show you in a couple, what we're going to show you is 3 different case scenarios. You will get into your breakout room, and within your group, you will decide which case scenario or case study you'd like to conceptualize. Pick someone in your room to discuss the experience and suggestions with the large group if you feel comfortable sharing. The small groups are going to meet in the breakout rooms for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then exit the breakout room when your group has completed this discussion. Then we will come back to the group and process and ask any questions that you have and offer any feedback.
Okay, so I'm just making sure that we can, oh great, we're gonna break you into small groups, but first let me just go through these 3 different cases. And when you're in your small groups, you can choose as a group which one your group would like to discuss. And then you can discuss which neuroscience-informed approaches you would like to use in this particular case study. And then choose a leader, come back in the group. We'll give you about, I think, six minutes, 6 to 7. So there's plenty of time for us to discuss as a large group as well. Maybe just 5. So here's one scenario. Let's say a parent tells you her 16-year-old daughter, Latinx, cisgender female, is lazy and won't get out of bed until noon on Saturday and Sunday and stays up until midnight or 1 a.m. on school nights on her devices and social media. She struggles with getting her up to get to school on time. She's also gotten moodier and more angry and negative at home and school. So based on what you know about teen brain development and sleep, how might you explain key factors of brain development to this particular teen and parent? And what neuroscience-informed approaches would you consider when working with this 16-year-old client? The second option is a cisgender male, age 12, biracial, Black and white. Eli is new to you and just started at a new school as well. He is currently in foster care and has only been placed in the home for a few months. You are aware that his mother is in prison and he has a history of abuse and trauma. He has been in therapy for a year to work on his anger management skills, but because of the new foster home placement, he's starting with a new therapist, you. When he arrives at your practice, he's yelling and making statements like, "Don't come near me," and "Get away from me." Based on what you've learned about brain development, what factors have and are impacting this child's brain functioning at this time, and what neuroscience-informed approaches would you consider to support this child? And lastly, think of any child or adolescent you know currently or in the past that you'd like to discuss in your small group using confidential anonymous names. And based on what you've learned about brain development, describe what may have been happening in this particular child's or adolescent's brain functioning and what approaches you may use. Okay, and then, so we're going to give you 5 minutes, and then we will come back as a large group and discuss it as well. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Who would like to share about their experience in this case study?
My
Joey,
team. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Michael. I was just going to do mine while it was still fresh in my head, but I could,
Please,
yeah,
go ahead.
get
You're
look
fine.
oh no. Okay. I was in a group with Jamie. Sorry, Jamie, I don't know your last name. So we decided to discuss someone close to me whose name is Jack, who is a 19-year-old home from summer, doing a lot of some self-harming behaviors, some risky behaviors, maybe some self-medicating due to ADHD. And we were talking about his last 2 years of high school were during the depths of the pandemic, and his girlfriend recently suffered a sexual assault, some other incidents too in his terms of his friend group. So Jamie's recommendations were to really tap into that friend group because that's their, at 19, at least I know in terms of this boy, he is, those are the world, your friends in social life. They're very, very supportive in terms of providing him with, happiness and joy and social outlet, but some of them may be encouraging him to use, and others are not necessarily aware or actively involved in their own mental health. Jamie also recommended group counseling. I've been to private counseling, but never group counseling. It seems harder to find for some reason. But I don't know if he would be amenable to that, but then Dr. Gray recommended, or maybe it was, I'm sorry, is it Dr. Goodwin, Miss Goodwin? I apologize if
it's okay. It's Miss.
Recommended an incentive to go to, like, if you go to counseling either alone or with me, would start with once every 2 weeks or something, once every 3 weeks, then you get to borrow the car without any hassles, whatever, something like that. We did go over the neuroscience backed part of it was the amount that he sleeps. Even though he's not in high school anymore, that still, I think, is affecting his success in college. But I think that's still, physiologically normal or in the normative range. Sleep. He already, like, as I mentioned, he already has ADHD, which he chooses usually not to treat. Sometimes he will take some medication if there's a big event coming up, and that does definitely affect his memory, short-term and long-term memory. The last thing we talked about was encouraging him to get more physical exercise, which will improve mood, attention, depression, anxiety, things of that nature. Jamie, did you want to add anything? Did I pretty much cover it?
Oh, yeah, you did great. The last piece I just wanted to say was there's also adventure counseling as well, which might be something that he's probably never heard of. And, he can go hiking and rock climbing while doing counseling as well. And that will kind of take that pressure off of, oh, I'm in a therapy session, right? And it's actually doing some physical activity while he's, getting that as well. So just another suggestion.
I love that. So now, not kind of like outward bound or anything like an intensive inpatient thing, but more of a weekend option. Is that right?
Well, they have actual like adventure counseling. I don't know if it's like, I know it's here. I live in Virginia. We have different counselors who do adventure counseling where they take their clients rock climbing or they go hiking for their actual therapy sessions. And so, I'm not sure how widespread that is, but that's also something that he could get into as well. And it takes the stress away, right? So not feeling like they're laying on the couch talking to a therapist, that we have that kind of idea of what therapy is sometimes. So he can get that physical activity. So I think that might be a good idea as well.
Thanks so much for sharing. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of the groups, but I hope you enjoyed that interactive part of this and getting to apply some of what we discussed today about neuroscience-informed counseling with any children you have. And we will get this PowerPoint to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us. And thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Colleen
Bye,
had to go
guys.
to another presentation, so she left me as host.
Thank you, Michael.
She can do that.
Thank
You know,
you.
she's my department manager. Thank you all so much. This was great. This was great. You will
Thank you.
probably be able to see your video of this presentation, as well as the rest of our conference on the Chicago School Counselor Education YouTube site. So you can direct anyone that you work with, any of your colleagues, to see the rest of our conference there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you. You're very welcome. Colleen started recording, so I guess it will come over to me. Or did I start it? I can't remember, but we should be fine. Okay, take care.